Thank you very much for joining this week's talk on the Sedra of behaalosecha, which is the portion of the Torah that we are going to read in synagogues, in shuls, in the diaspora. In Israel, they're still a week ahead. They are going to be reading the Sedra of Shelach Lecha. And there is such a lot of very fascinating and relevant, as always, material in the Sedra of behaalosecha, but I want to focus on two, I would say, very famous verses. Sometimes we pick on things that perhaps have not are not so well known and so well read, but these two verses are extremely familiar because we say them every time we take out the Sefer Torah. In shul, they are sung, and so if you show these verses to people who have gone to shul or go to shul regularly, they will generally start singing the tune of these two verses. I'm referring to the two verses in chapter 10 of Bamidbar, Numbers, verses 35 and 36, and I'm going to read them, translate them, and also show you how they look in the actual Torah scroll from the Tikkun. So here goes. Vayehi bin Soar Ha'aron. It was when the ark would journey. Vayomer Moshe, and Moshe said, Kuma Hashem, arise Hashem, vayofutsu oyavecha, and let your enemies be scattered, vayonusu misanecha mipanecha, and let those who hate you flee from before you. Uvenucha Yoma, and when it rested, he would say, Shuva Hashem Ravovos Alfei Yisrael. Reside tranquilly, Hashem, among the myriads and thousands of Israel. So I'm sure that most of you are going to be familiar with this in some way, shape, or form. And I want to actually show you how it looks in the Tikkun. And what I'm pointing out, where my finger is over here, these two full lines and say two half lines, and these characters over here, so one that I'm pointing to over there and the other one below, they are inverted nuns. The letter nun that has been turned upside down. They look like parentheses. They are possibly the first recorded instances of brackets, and the uniqueness of this character, as far as I'm aware, it's not in any other place in the Torah written in this way with this significance. So this is something that gave rise to many interpretations as to what the significance of these characters are. And according to Rashi, this was meant to show that these two verses were actually out of context. They should have really been somewhere else, but they were inserted here. And those two nuns, those characters, are indicative of that. We have another opinion. We have a plethora of possibilities, 70 facets of the Torah, always contributing something new to thinking about the Torah, the interpretation, how it applies to our life. And the Gemara in Shabbos tells us, in the name of Rav, that actually those symbols, the parentheses that we are sort of attributing, they are not inverted commas, brackets. They are actually showing us that this is a book on its own. This is not just an insert from somewhere else, but actually this has a status of a separate book of the Torah. So if somebody asks you a question, how many books are there in the Torah? We have the famous song on Seder night, Echad Miyodeh, who knows one? Chamishei Chumshei Torah. 5 are the books of the Torah. This is the standard answer given. 5 books of Moses, 5 books of the Torah. The 5 books of Moses and the 5 books of Torah are interchangeable, and I think that is yet another sign of how inextricably woven together Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, and the Torah is. And really, we're used to thinking of the 5 books, but this way of understanding the two verses that I read out, actually attributes these two verses the status of a complete book. And if that is the case, then we really need to think about these two verses, that they should be given, they should be counted as one of the either five, now making it seven actually, because by calling these two verses a book on their own, it means that the book of Bamidbar, of Numbers, actually is not one book but three, because you have the section before the two verses, book one, section of the two verses, book two, and now the section after the two verses, book three. I'm talking about the whole Sefer of Bamidbar now, giving us a total of seven books of the Torah. So I think that there are very significant lessons for going according to this version, this way of understanding the two verses as a book on their own. And I think that firstly, and possibly most easily most comprehensible, is if they have the status of a book, they must contain a message that is so crucial, and although albeit succinct, it's very brief, and often the greater the artist, the fewer the brushstrokes, the greater the writer, the fewer the words in many cases. The fact that it contains just two, in inverted commas, two verses is in no way diminishing, because every letter, and as we've seen always, but especially in this case, the fact that we are learning so much from these two characters that resemble inverted nuns, it just goes to show how calculating by numbers in terms of volume of words, etc., is not a way to really understand the significance of any particular element of the Torah. So I think that when we just read through those verses and understand that these verses are a rallying call, they are taken, they are said. The ark rests, and it's the people during their sojourn in the desert, certainly as they move towards the land of Israel, they are going to encounter challenges, even in the desert, just being in the very inhospitable environment with the potential for enemies to attack them at any point, is something that requires great courage, great emunah, great faith in Hashem, because it is against the natural order that newly released slaves in a desert environment are going to survive the environment, the hostility of the environment, the human enemies that are surrounding them, at best very unfriendly, not allowing them to pass through their lands, not selling them food and water when the Bnei Yisrael, when Moses asks them. So we are really needing to internalize the lesson that we do not trust in people. Ultimately, our source of strength, our capacity to overcome, is a gift from Hashem. And so really this is focusing the people, Vayhi bin Soa Aaron, and it was when the ark journeyed, and as they journey, they look at the ark as the focus of their courage, their ability to overcome. And this is a really crucial message, and it doesn't just apply to the generation who have stood physically at the foothills of Har Sinai, of Mount Sinai. It applies to all of us always. We are always going to be navigating challenges. We are always going to have to find that anchor that secures us when the winds of life will buffet us, and even on calm seas, even when it's, as it were, smoother sailing, there are always going to be challenges to our way of thinking, to our integrity, to our the whatever challenge comes our way, we are going to need to have this rallying cry. And so I think that I can understand why this message is going to be said in these way at this point in time. And what it also does is it I think that it encourages us to visualize the entire either 5 or 7 books of the Torah in a different format, because very often we're used to thinking of them in a linear or possibly historical way, chronologically, even though we learn that the Torah is not a history book and does not stick slavishly to chronological order. But equally, there is a presumption, unless it's rebutted, that the events in the Torah are told in an orderly sequence, unless there's a reason to depart from that. So we're used to thinking of it in a line: Bereshis, Shemos, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim. It's this from creation through to the Exodus, the encampment in the desert, to Har Sinai, and afterwards the events that happen after Har Sinai, as the what should have been a 3-day journey in the desert becomes a 40-year stay, and then finally Moshe Rabbeinu's parting words to his beloved people. And we think of it as a straight line. By having this book, I was going to say in inverted commas or in inverted nuns, we are actually looking at it in a different way, because what this book is doing is giving us a picture in the middle, and that picture in the middle is the Oron. And the Oron, the ark, because the verses allude to the journeying of the ark, and that contains the luchos and also actually a jar of mon as well. And it is the central theme, it is the focus, it is the fulcrum. And so instead of seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and understanding the Torah in that, or as well as, let me say, we have the Oron in the center, and we have the other books of the Torah arranged around the Oron, as it were, pointing towards the Oron. So if we want to have Bereshis and Shemos on the right hand side, Vayikra, Bamidbar and Devarim on the left hand side, and then in the middle, the picture of the ark, which is described in great detail in Vayikra, and also in the construction, actually at the end of Shemos as well, how to build the ark. But all of this is just that way of visualizing the Torah with the fulcrum, with the center as the Torah. And it is the verses are not a straightforward magic wand type. When you show the ark, you are guaranteed victory in battle. Your enemies will flee from before you, and Hashem is just going to be on your side by the automatic display of the Aron HaKodesh, of the Holy Ark. And we have actual proof of this concept, and that we find in Shmuel, Shmuel Aleph, the first book of Samuel, chapter 4, verse 3. And this describes battles that were taking place between the Jewish people and the Philistines. And they this battle actually took place around the area of what is today called Rosh Ha'ayin, that is quite near Petach Tikva, and it's in the time of Shmuel, it's described as Afek, this place called Afek. I'm going to read you the verses, which come from chapter 4, verse 3. Vayavo ha'am el ha'machane, and the people came to the camp. Vayomru ziknei Yisrael, and the elders of Israel said, Lama nagafonu Hashem hayom. Why has Hashem smitten us today? Lifnei Pelishtim, Nikra Elenu Mishilo, Es Aaron Baris Hashem. Let us take from before us today, let us take to us from Shiloh the ark, the covenant of Hashem. Vayavo b'kirbenu, and it should come to us in our midst. V'yoshienu mikaf ovenu, and it will save us from the hand of our enemy. And this is actually what happens. This was brought on by the fact that in the battle that the elders were describing, that happened before they actually brought the ark onto the battlefield. The Philistines were victorious, and they actually killed 4,000 Jewish soldiers. And so, thinking that by having the ark in their presence, they would avoid such a catastrophic defeat. That was the motivation for doing so. And initially, it seemed to have the desired effect. There was great excitement in the camp of the Jewish people. Equally, the Philistines were worried that the ark is going to be a powerful aid in the battle, and it will enable the Bnei Israel to be victorious. And you can see it looks like the tide is turning. However, the end result is that the Philistines achieve an even greater victory um, in the battle when the ark is actually in the Israelite camp, and 30,000 Jewish soldiers are slain. And so you might say that the verses seem to a promise to assure that if you say them almost, then Hashem is going to be on our side, and our enemies are going to flee before us, and this is going to assure us of victory. And clearly, the message from the events in Shmuel show that this is not any kind of talisman or magic wand. This is something that requires the presence of the ark. Yes, the physical presence of the ark is a very powerful image, blessing, merit to have the ark. It's something that we're not privileged to have at the moment, but still, it is really understanding that the ark is a way to get us to internalize the values of the Torah, to get us to really get inside the concept of belief in Hashem, understanding that Hashem is the source of our strength, that the Torah is the source of our well-being and our wisdom. And when we do that, then the confidence and the strength that we need to overcome our enemies is going to be with us in spades. But it is not just some kind of talisman. It is not just some kind of just object that is going to be, going to bring some kind of magic aspect and cause the enemies to disappear. It is the way we use our focus to understand that it is Hashem who is the source of everything, and really have our emunah, as it were, ignited by that vision. We have the graphic vision, we have the physical sight of it, but it is not meant to be just just something that stops at that initial graphic level. And so this really, if we understand it like that, we can appreciate how these two verses could be a book in and of themselves, because this graphic visualization that is going to be taking us to higher levels of emunah in Hashem, this is something that we really need to keep in the forefront of our lives. So when we read these pasukim, and when we read them in the Torah, when we say them, sing them, as the Sefer Torah is being brought out of the ark in shuls, in synagogues all over the world, we have this sense of connection and unity with our history, with the words of the Torah, with our present, and it all becomes one seamless whole. And this is something that we can actually also translate into our lives, as we have another visualization, another mitzvah, which is the mitzvah of mezuzah. And the mitzvah of mezuzah, we have the specific parshios, the specific paragraphs from the Torah that must be written by a professional scribe, by a sofer, and as we put them on our doorposts. And again, they sort of have this status. Sometimes decorators, when they're painting houses, they've been known to think, oh gosh, it's a lucky charm. And they take off the mezuzah boxes and paint underneath it, see the scroll inside, take out the scroll, and then put the box back. the empty box back because they think it's like some kind of magic charm. And this is something that we also need to understand, that the levels of protection that we get from mezuzah is because of the words that are written inside and the way we bring them into our homes, that we enter our homes, that we leave our homes in the shade, in the shadow of these words and everything that they mean. And just quoting from Maimonides, the Rambam, Mishnah Torah, Mezuzah, chapter 5, and I'm just going to give you a direct quote. He is criticizing people who see it as some kind of amulet. They, however, who write names of angels, holy names, a biblical text within the mezuzah, are among those who have no portion in the world to come. For these fools not only fail to fulfill the commandment, but they treat an important precept that expresses the unity of God, the love of Him, and His worship, as if it were an amulet to promote their own personal interests. So this is the way we have to look at the Oron. This is the way we have to understand these Pesukim. And this is the way we today look at our mezuzahs. And in so doing, we are going to achieve greater levels of connection with the Torah and with Hashem. And I think that we can certainly understand why, because of the unusual characters that seem to suspend these two verses in their own reality. And we've often commented how each letter, each space, there is nothing in the Torah that doesn't have some kind of unique, deep meaning. And it is for us to plumb those depths and to really try to understand. And so, because of those unusual symbols, and because of that very intense message, we can, by viewing it as a separate book, and if there's ever a question in a quiz, how many books in the Torah are there, and you could, with justification, with sources upon which to rely, you could say 7, even though the standard traditional answer is 5. I think that there are very very powerful reasons for thinking of this as a separate book, and this is something that will really enrich our way of relating to the verses and to the Torah. And even though there are many different explanations as to why, some people will say they want to separate between what goes before, which is more positive in terms of the things that happen to Bnei Yisrael, and then what comes after, which begins a very sort of a progression downwards in terms of Bnei Yisrael's behavior and events. But I think that it is also very, very helpful and very there are grounds to really understand it as a separate book, for us to really focus on it and give it the importance of a book in its own right. And I think, to conclude, it's worth looking at what Rashi says on these very beautiful words. And just I want to actually focus on the words from Kuma Hashem, Arise Hashem. Lefi shehaya makdim lefnehem malach sheloshes yomim, because the ark would go ahead of them by 3 days' journey. Haya Moshe Omer, Moshe would say, Amod, v'hamtein lanu, stand and wait, halt and wait for us. But al tisrachek yoter, do not distance yourself yet further. So that's a very beautiful way of Moshe, as it were, begging the ark, which represents the presence of Hashem, not to put more than 3 days distance between the ark and the people. But your futsu oivecha, and let your enemies be scattered. Um, this hamachusonin, this refers to those who are gathered together. V'yonusu masanecha, and let those who hate you flee. Elu harodfim, these are those who pursue. Masanecha, those who hate you. Elu sone Yisrael, these are those who hate Israel. Shekol hasone es Yisrael, for whoever hates Israel, sone es mi she'omar v'hoya olam, hates the one who spoke and brought the world into being. And I want to stop there a moment, and I think that this also speaks an essential truth, and might also be a way of understanding why these psukim should have the status of a book. And and I think sometimes when we think about anti-Semitism, we feel that we are the object of that. It is directed at us personally, nationally, communally. I think that these words of Rashi here that really define the fact that when you have people hating the Jews, they are in fact hating the one who said, "Let there Baruch she'amar v'haya olam," as we say in our morning prayers. The one who said, "Blessed be the one who said, let there be a world," the creator of the world. And I think that we are able to overcome that when we infuse ourselves with this strength, with this emunah, with this belief in Hashem, with this connection to the Torah. That is the source of morality, that is the source of wisdom. And then we continue in this very beautiful way, Uvenocho Yomar, and when it rested, he would say, Shuva Hashem Revovos Alfei Yisrael, reside tranquilly, Hashem.